Ruin is finally here and it blew me away. Across the board, people are saying it's a breath of fresh air for modern Five Nights at Freddy's. Even people who disliked or even hated Security Breach are giving props to Steel Wolf for what they've done. And why wouldn't they? Everything from the graphics to the gameplay with the whole mask mechanic to even the fact that it's actually scary this time, with a few decent jumps throughout. The basic story explanation is our player character Cassie gets a message from her friend Gregory to come to the Pizzaplex, but he doesn't say why. When we get there, we can't find him, but we do find the Pizzaplex is in a terrible state after what the papers call an earthquake. Going a bit deeper, we find a walkie-talkie in which we hear Gregory tell us that he's trapped in the pit at the bottom of Roxy Raceway. Something grabbed him and now he's stuck. We need to come save him. Going deeper, we encounter Glamrock Chica. She tries to attack us but powers down almost immediately. It's likely that this happened because of the terrible damage and somewhat melting that she's endured so far. We go further in and find a Faz wrench, a tool used by the staff at the Pizzaplex, and Cassie remarks it looks just like her dad's. She soon encounters Monty, falls into the sewage, and ends up at Monty Gator Golf. She then encounters the damaged staff bot that gives her the virtual augmented neural network integration mask, or the Vanny mask. We will get into it. It shows us an AR version of the real world that tells us that some objects are and aren't real. It also displays the security nodes. These are virtual manifestations placed around the Pizzaplex that power and activate security measures, things like locked doors and the like. They are part of the M.X.E.S or M.X.E.S system, something that was put in place by someone to conceal and trap the endoskeleton in the basement. We will get there. Once we put on the Vanny mask, we meet Helpie, a digital assistant. He seems like a perfectly friendly digital assistant, but then he puts an ocular implant that allows him to be in our vision even when we're not wearing the mask. He also occasionally says some whack shit, but when he does, his eyes go yellow and some veins appear on his head, so something else is going on there. Finally, in this section, we meet the rabbit entity trying to stop us. We're all pretty sure what it is, but that's technically speculation, so for now I'll just say this digital rabbit is trying to protect the security nodes, and in doing so, releases distress calls to the animatronics to try and stop us. We follow this basic setup through pretty much the rest of the game, using the Vanny mask to navigate the Pizzaplex and turn off the security nodes, following the instructions of Gregory and Helpie. All the while, M.X.E.S and this rabbit entity is trying to stop us. However, we do learn some things in the meantime. Not only did Monty replace Bonnie, but Bonnie's full animatronic is still at the Pizzaplex, just destroyed. If you deactivate every wet floor bot and do something else, I don't know, I still can't get it to work myself, there's a hidden room in the back of Bonnie Bowl that shows Bonnie's full, damaged animatronic, surrounded by 4 more wet floor bots. There's a broken bowling ball that seems to imply that he was damaged here as well, but any more is going to be speculation. This does, however, nearly deconfirm that Glamrock Bonnie was used for parts to create Burn Trap, mainly because all the parts for Glamrock Bonnie are still here. We also learn that Roxy did in fact replace Foxy, but much earlier than Monty replaced Bonnie. She also fully replaced him in the Pizzaplex as a whole. Bonnie Bowl still exists, but where Roxy Raceway is, Foxy's log flume once was. For unknown reasons, it and all of the Foxy merchandise around it has been tucked and hidden away. Finally, at Roxy Raceway and Roxy Salon, we learn a lot more about our player character, Cassie. From the Roxy dialogue at the end of the game and the cardboard cutouts we see here, we learn that she had a birthday at the Pizzaplex on the 11th, but nobody came. Roxy was there, and eventually, possibly, Gregory showed up too. Other than that, no one showed up. Speaking of Roxy, there's some interesting things about her animatronic specifically. When we put the Vanny mask on, Chica and Monty just appear in the weird X-ray vision that most things do. Freddy completely disappears. I forgot Freddy. We'll get into Freddy. But Roxy looks different. We see a digital recreation of what Roxy looked like before she was damaged. Furthermore, Roxy is the only one that recognizes us as a child, remembers us being there, and turns friendly by the end on her own volition seemingly. And finally, when we deactivate her at the instruction of Gregory and Helpie, this digital recreation goes away. Now, Freddy, totally forgot about him. We encounter him in Blast, and while he is missing his head, implying the Princess Quest ending, he seems to have a weird stomach mouth. Any more is going to be speculation, so I'll leave the rest of the discussion when we get there. Going down into the hole under Roxy Raceway, we see that something has tunneled out of the old pizzeria, because there's a tunnel leading straight from there through the giant Freddy statue. Presumably this is the Blob, since we see the Blob leave early in the game, but we don't know for sure. Going through, we find a huge cave filled with water and glowing mushrooms, and going even further, we see what looks like the pizzeria with some weird wooden sections. Inside, Candy Cadet tells us a story which I'll summarize to: a mother and son live in a cabin in the woods, there's a monster in the woods, the mother locks the monster in the basement, the mother sings a lullaby to the son every night, eventually the monster learns the lullaby and tricks the son to open the door with it. The story ends there. We go deeper in and we find the rooms that make up the FNAF 6 labyrinth. Even further in, and we find the M.X.E.S central hub. We put on the mask and turn it off. In doing so, the rabbit entity pops out of it to grab us but gets sucked back in. We then power a forklift to bust down the cement-covered doorway, and we meet it, the endoskeleton that's been locked in the basement. We learn that this whole time, who we thought was Gregory was this endoskeleton mimicking his voice. We will get there, believe me. Then, seemingly, Gregory's voice calls us, the real Gregory. He warns us that this is all a trap, we're not meant to be here at all, and tells us that his friend has instructions on how to get out, and then leads us to an elevator. If you go in the elevator, Gregory explains a bit more of the situation, there's a bit of feedback on the walkie-talkie, then he says that he understands that we did this for him, and he's sorry, but he has to make sure that we weren't followed. And the elevator drops, seemingly killing Cassie, but then at the end of credits, Roxy says, "Cassie?" So she's probably alive. There's also 2 more endings here. If you disobey Gregory's orders and eventually go left, you find a Fredbear cutout holding 2 ice cream cones. If you put on the Vanny mask, you see a recreation of the Save Vanny Good Princess Quest ending. However, Freddy's head has been swapped out for Helpie and they're all holding ice cream cones instead of what they were holding originally. We hear Gregory said that he found a safe place to hide, and it ends. However, there's one more secret ending, this one much harder to get. There's 4 hidden cameras throughout the game, each of which open a door in this chase sequence. If we've activated all 4, the endoskeleton is no longer just an endoskeleton. We get there and it's created this stitched version of several different mascot suits, all created into one. It seems to be a lion base with elephant and bird parts stitched together. If we go down the doors we've opened during the chase sequence, we then go into a room very reminiscent of the scooper room from Sister Location. We turn it on, and what looks like a scooper, and the game files call a scooper, dismantles the endoskeleton in front of us. And let me tell you, I was not expecting that. He's kind of in the Family Guy dead pose. What is that? And if you want to see me actually play through Security Breach Ruin for the first time on stream live, there's a full 6.5-hour VOD on this channel. But if that's too long and daunting, I actually have something to announce. From what I can see, 2 people solved the puzzle that I've been laying out for a few months now. So shout out to Pool Noodles and Sandwichly. But I am officially launching a second channel, Rye Toost. It will primarily be highly edited versions of the streams that we do on this channel, done by my
wonderful, talented, funny, and wholesome
editor, Queen Coda. Expect content like this.
Huh?
Who were those little friends? Oh, shit. But it will also be home to videos I want to make that don't really fit on a FNAF Theory channel. Things like Pokemon Nuzlocke, Mario game rankings, cooking content, who knows. The channel officially launches next week, but the channel is currently made, so you can go find it here to subscribe and turn the notifications on, and I'll see you in a week from now. One of the videos on launch will be part 1 of my Ruin Security Breach playthrough, and I personally cannot wait to start this new venture with you guys. Thank you so much for allowing me to live my dreams like this. But anyway, that was the entire plot of Ruin. It's a very weird plot with a lot of interesting points to go on. But now, it's time to start theorizing. So bake with me for a second as we'll start chronologically. First, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the canon ending for Security Breach is officially the Princess Quest Save Vanny ending. After all, Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head are nowhere to be found in this DLC. Second, Freddy is damaged and headless in the same place he would be at the end of that ending. Third, the Princess Quest machine in the Vanny hideout is toppled on its side with an AR yellow sword stuck straight through it, implying that it's been beaten. Fourth and finally, I think part of what the Fredbear cutout ending is telling us is doubling down that the Princess Quest ending is canon. Next up, Cassie's dad. Now, I'm working on a much more controversial theory in the background, expect that one in like a week or 2, but for now, let's just go over the direct implications in the game. When Cassie picks up the Faz wrench, she notes that it looks just like her dad's, and when we look at the description, it says that they're used by Faz technicians, so we can assume that her dad was a technician at the Pizzaplex. I say was because several times in this game when he's referenced in the past tense. Bonnie was his favorite. He used to collect things like this. I think this is all implying that our father worked at the Pizzaplex as a technician, but has since died. I do think he's very closely linked to the Pizzaplex though, at least the franchise as a whole, as we learn that his favorite animatronic was Bonnie, he used to collect old vintage lunchboxes, and he knew what happened to Glamrock Bonnie. So he's been around in this franchise for quite some time. Any deeper speculation than that wouldn't suit the vibe of this video. So we'll leave it that Cassie's dad was a technician at the Pizzaplex, but is now dead. Now, I'm going to save the Vanny mask for when we talk about Helpie, Gregory, and the endoskeleton, so for now, let's just talk about M.X.E.S. I think it's fairly safe to assume that the rabbit entity chasing us throughout the game is just the digital manifestation of the M.X.E.S system. I also think that M.X.E.S is the good guy here. If the mask is what allows us to deactivate security protocols, M.X.E.S is just acting upon its initial programming. Like, of course he would want to stop us. That's the whole reason this Toon Summoned Skull was ever created. He did nothing wrong, just following programming. The next thing to mention is this weird connection between the wet floorbots and Glamrock Bonnie. I mentioned that you have to turn off every wet floorbot to gain access to him, but he's also surrounded by 4 wet floorbots while still active. If you deactivate those 4 as well, he shuts off. Not only that, but when you go in his green room tunnel, first thing you see is an outline of the wet floorbots. And when you approach active wet floorbots with the Vanny mask, you hear these ghostly wails. Something is here, like there is some kind of connection between the wet floorbots and Glamrock Bonnie. I just have no clue what it is yet. Freddy also presents some questions. With his missing head and the location he's in, plus the heavy damage, it implies that this is the same Freddy at the end of the Princess Quest ending. However, there are some issues with this. 1, the damage on his front looks intentional as it's formed into a mouth. And 2, there's this weird prototype stamp on his foot. I bring up the damage because everything else seems accidental and like they were just destroyed throughout the game, whereas Freddy seems intentionally made that way. But that could just be a cool design feature. The prototype thing has me hesitate a little more. In Security Breach, Freddy does not have this prototype tag on the bottom of his foot. This is new. This could imply that this is a separate Freddy, but I think it makes the most sense that this is Steelwool either slightly retconning the design or just it's been revealed through more damage that he is a prototype, and it's their way of explaining a little bit more on why the glitch-trap virus didn't perfectly infect Glamrock Freddy. Alright, I've put it off long enough. Let's talk Gregory, Helpie, and the Vanny mask. I think it is most likely that the endoskeleton in the basement of the Pizzaplex is the Mimic, the main antagonist from the epilogues of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. Now, I'm not going to go into the debate on whether or not those books are within continuity. There is still speculation on both sides, and it's very heated on both sides. That's not what this video is meant to do. So I'm just going to go over what the Mimic means for this game, and I'll make references to the book. This endoskeleton, the Mimic, has the ability to recreate actions it sees and voices it hears. And it's that ability that it uses to trick Cassie into freeing it from the Pizzaplex. The Gregory we hear throughout the majority, if not all of the game, is actually the Mimic pretending to be Gregory on a walkie-talkie. But if that's the case, what about Helpie? He seems to be allied with this fake Gregory, and although he looks normal, occasionally he seems to be taken over by something more sinister. Is this just the Mimic again? I hesitate on that, mainly because there's a few times in the games where Gregory and Helpie seem to bicker. One of the examples is the first time that M.X.E.S is shut off in the Monty catwalks. Helpie mentions that he activated a jammer that counteracted him, but then Gregory chimes in saying that he did the real work. If this was all the Mimic, this seems a little too intelligent for the trick it's trying to pull here, to be pretending to have a fake fight to seem more real. It seems like these are two separate entities, but if they are, I have no clue what Helpie is. Maybe it's Glitchtrap and he's still hanging around, it's still too early to tell. And finally, the Vanny mask, or the Virtual Augmented Neural Network Integration mask. I've seen some debate on what this mask is, but I personally believe it's fairly obvious. The acronym tells us exactly what it does. This is not a security mask, and it never was used by any of the staff here. This is the Mimic or Glitchtrap's way of getting inside of Cassie's mind. The moment Helpie does that like occipital integration thing, we lose. We see him in the real world, it's over. Think about what the acronym is saying here. Virtual Augmented Neural Network Integration. A neural network is a computer program based around the human mind. It's essentially a type of AI, and it's being integrated into us. So what does virtual augmented mean? Well, it could be referring to the AR features of the mask, but I think these adjectives adjectives are modifying the nouns of that phrase. I think the neural network being implemented into Cassie's brain has been virtually augmented by Glitchtrap. This mask is how Glitchtrap, or the Mimic, is going to take over Cassie's mind, which leads me to the endings. The most straightforward ending, I feel, is the elevator, but I don't fully agree with what the game is presenting here. Several folks on Twitter already noticed that there's a shift in the dialogue while in the elevator. Gregory seems to break for a moment and there's a mic feedback, and suddenly the dialogue repeats that it's Gregory. A lot of people, and myself included, think that this is where the Mimic retakes over communication with Cassie. And that's right when Gregory starts to say, "I know you didn't mean it, this is not your fault, but I can't let you be followed," and the elevator falls. Essentially, I don't think Gregory said that, nor do I think Gregory dropped the elevator. I think that's the Mimic taking back control. Also, Cassie surviving that elevator fall is very suspect, but I'm hesitant to think of any kind of robot kid shenanigans for now. To me, the second most straightforward ending is the Fredbear cutout one. We see it, we put on the Vanny mask, and we see a recreation of Princess Quest. I think this ending is Cassie losing, because I think this is a recreation of the Princess Quest ending. Literally, this is the augmented neural network taking effect, and Cassie's mind is trapped in this idyllic fantasy that she made it out and everything is okay. Meanwhile, on the outside, Cassie's turned into the next Vanny. They already built the cage around the true mind of Cassie. There's a lot more evidence for this, but that gets into very speculative waters, so I'll save it for like 2 weeks from now. Finally, the strangest ending of all, what the files call the scooper ending, where the Mimic puts on a stitched together costume, chases us into like a sister location room, and gets scooped. I'ma be so real, I have no fucking clue what this means. I will say, however, and I'm just gonna touch on this ending is the main reason why I'm still not convinced that the Tales from the Pizzaplex books are in continuity. Hear me out. A huge important factor of the Mimic is the white tiger. In the books, the Mimic first copies its creator's son, David. David's favorite animal being a white tiger. He has a plushie of it, his bed looks like it, and several times in the books, when it has the choice to present as something, it is a white tiger. In the storyteller, the head of a white tiger animatronic has the Mimic inside it. In Tiger Rock, it presents itself as the Tiger Rock animatronic in this VR game. The Mimic likes presenting as a white tiger, which makes me feel like this moment would have been a shoo-in for Steelwool to say, "Hey, the books are in continuity, look, it's an endoskeleton wearing a white tiger." I would have shut the hell up. I would have fully accepted that, but they didn't. They specifically chose a lion with other animals stitched on the sides. To me, in the current moment, this feels very specific because tigers and lions are pretty close, but they're not the same thing. To me, this feels like Steelwool trying to tell us in very specific terms, this Mimic we're presenting you is very similar to the Tales from the Pizzaplex Mimic, but it's not the same one. We've stitched on some extra things and changed its backstory. That's where I'm at right now. Just gonna be honest, I know people are gonna hate that. That's where I'm at. And hey, guess what? You're allowed to hate that and you're allowed to disagree with me. That's how this shit works. But I will be going deeper in on that next week for some extra reasons why. Cassie, we don't get all that much information about her compared to other video game protagonists, but for FNAF standards, we honestly know a lot about her. Or do we really? Slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. So what is the story of Cassie? At first, all we know is that she's a girl of a similar age to Gregory, and that she's friends with him enough to go to this scary abandoned Pizzaplex to meet him. As the game goes on, we begin to learn more about her. When we pick up the Roxy talkie after hearing Gregory's voice, we learn that he's trapped under Roxy Raceway and that we agree to go find him. We also learn that Roxanne Wolf is Cassie's favorite character. Keep that in mind because it's important later on. Quickly after, we learn more about Cassie's family, namely her father. When we pick up the Faz wrench, one of the main 3 items in the game, she remarks that it looks just like her dad's. Her dad? The Faz wrench is an item described as being used by Faz technicians. So this implies that her father was a Faz technician at the Pizzaplex, if this one looks just like his. But that's not the only information about her father that affirms this detail. Later, when we get an AR Glam Bonnie plush, Cassie notes that her father never told her what happened to him. If her father knew what happened to him, he would have not only had to be part of the company, but pretty high up. Not only does this nearly confirm that he worked for the Pizzaplex, but he also worked here fairly recently. We're not talking about someone who used to work at the Pizzaplex but retired and is living with his daughter. Bonnie was put out of commission so quickly that although they did change most of the art in the Pizzaplex, they still didn't have an official corporate story to what happened to Bonnie as of Security Breach. We can honestly assume that her father was most likely working there until at least Security Breach, which brings me to something else about her father. A lot of the information we get about him describes him in the past tense. Dad wouldn't tell me instead of dad won't tell me. My dad used to collect these instead of my dad collects these. Bonnie was my dad's favorite instead of Bonnie is my dad's favorite. The repeated use of the past tense makes me assume that her father is most likely dead, for who knows how long, but at least long enough that being reminded of him with the Faz wrench didn't seem to upset her. And for a while, that's really all we get about Cassie. Honestly, that's all we get about her for the majority of the game. But then Roxy Raceway starts telling us more, starting with the Roxy Salon. We get a bunch of cardboard cutouts of Roxy hanging out with Cassie, having a great day, doing their makeup and things like that. We also get these two cardboard cutouts back to back of Gregory giving something to Cassie, and then Cassie in tears looking at Gregory's missing posters. It seems as though we're right to assume that Cassie really likes Roxy, although at this point we're not 100% sure why. We can also assume that this is part of the reason why Cassie is so willing to help Gregory. They are close friends if these images are to be believed. And then of course, the scene that gave a lot of us a lot of dread, shutting off Roxy right outside of the end of the game. However, when we encounter Roxy, she gives us a lot of information. She tells us that she remembers our special day, most likely a birthday party, and most likely our 11th birthday party. Now, she just says it was the 11th, so this could be a date, but the lack of a month suggests that it was our 11th birthday. And finally, she says, "I'm sure your friends will show up next time. Have you booked your party yet?" And suddenly, everything clicks. That's why Roxy is her favorite. That's why she's so willing to help Gregory this far in this dangerous mission. Cassie has no other friends. On her 11th birthday, she was completely alone. Her father didn't even show up. He might have already been dead by the time that happens. There's only one animatronic there, Roxy. She tries to have a fun day, bonding with Roxy, doing makeovers and everything like it, but it only helps so much. She's still sad and alone. Until Gregory, that is. He comes to her birthday and they become friends quickly. She's willing to go this far to save Gregory because he is her only friend. She has to save him, just like he saved her. After this admittedly rough moment, we go deeper down. We find the room keeping the thing in the basement locked away. Turning off M.X.E.S and breaking down the wall, we encounter it. What we thought was Gregory. We encounter the Mimic. Roxy, somehow still alive, saves us apparently, for a time being, and Gregory, the real Gregory, gets a hold of us. He tells us that he's been trying to get a hold of us this whole time, which I am inclined to believe. After all, halfway through the game there's a rare moment that only some people got. This jump scare...
Do you need assistance?
Bastard.
Do you need assistance?
No.
Do you need assistance?
Go away. Can occasionally be replaced with this.
Cassie, is that you? Gregory?
That feels like the real Gregory trying to get a hold of Cassie, to me anyway. He tells us to listen to his friend's instructions to get us to an elevator to escape. Once there, he lets us know more about M.X.E.S, that it was created and designed to hide this thing in the basement. Then he switches tone, tells us that he's sorry but he has to make sure that we're not followed, and drops the elevator. Now, I have reasons to believe that Gregory isn't the one talking to us at the end of this ending, and instead the Mimic took back over, but that's a topic for another video. For now, we're focusing on Cassie, but is that it? What else could we possibly know about her? Well, I think there is more to her and her father, and the key to solving it, frankly, is through the premise of the game. Gregory never wanted Cassie to go to the Pizzaplex, so the initial message that she got from Gregory to meet at the Pizzaplex was fake. Okay, so then the Mimic sent that message. Well, therein lies the problem. How did the Mimic contact Cassie? Or why did he even think to contact her in the first place? Sure, the Mimic can learn Gregory's voice from the security logs throughout the Pizzaplex, but why why would it know to contact Cassie? Or how could it even reach her? It has no service, no freedom, no money. The only thing it could do is something free and easy that supports someone, like subscribing to my new second channel, Rytus, that's launching 2 videos today. My wife and I's playthrough of Faith Chapter 1 and Part 1 of my Security Breach Ruin playthrough. Link right here. Thank you so much. It's highly edited content. It'll be variety. It'll be every week, and it's edited by the very talented Queen Coda. I'll see you there. But in all seriousness, all the Mimic could physically do is wander around the room that it's locked in. But if you look around the room we're adjacent to, putting on the Vanny mask, you'll see a bunch of destroyed security nodes lying around the floor. It was destroying its bonds while it was in its cage. That's why I think Gregory and Vanny cemented over the door. They knew it was already trying to break out. And specifically, I think Gregory and Vanessa are the ones that cemented him into that room specifically because of the Gregory backpack right outside the vent, right outside the room. But that's, again, theory for another day. Whatever locked it down here started placing security nodes all over the Pizzaplex to try to distance it from the ones it was already breaking, which means in some digital way it can reach into this room. And what do we have in this room? The machine that was created to contain it that presumably it can't directly interact with, and the console used to modify the machine, but it's a console nonetheless. So who would have used that console last? Well, let's step back and get a broader picture to see if we can answer that. A recurring theme in the duffel bag messages of Security Breach is that although she wasn't being sloppy, Vanny's shenanigans were starting to be noticed by several of the human staff. But right as a few of them were about to uncover something big, they were all called in to the all-staff meeting. Specifically, one that was after hours, cake was promised at, and that all service staff were required to go to. Now, a lot of people have theorized that although mass firing was already taking place because of the staff-bot success, this all-staff meeting was Vanny's way of tying up any loose ends, killing off people that would have otherwise uncovered what was really going on. Pretty much any service staff who would be poking around places they shouldn't be. Mainly people like janitors, kitchen workers, and technicians. Technicians just like Cassie's dad. Well, we know he's dead, but why would we assume that he was getting too close to Vanny? What could he have found? Why was he digging? The answers lie in Candy Cadet. Right before the ending of the game, we see Candy Cadet, who tells us a 5-part story. The story tells us about a mother and a son who live in a cabin in the woods. In the woods, there's a monster that the mother locks in the basement. Every night, the mother sings a lullaby to the son and then leaves. Eventually, the monster stops growling and instead learns the lullaby. It sings it once, the son goes to the door and opens it. The story ends there, but like, the monster kills the son. It's pretty straightforward. For a while, I was thinking that this story was detailing what Vanessa and Gregory do in between Security Breach and Ruin. They find the monster, trap it underground, and then eventually it learns to mimic the sun. But there's 2 problems with it. First off, Vanessa and Gregory aren't mother and son, they're just 2 people. Granted, that's not a huge issue because it is a story, so it's supposed to be a metaphor, but the real issue here is that in the story, the son is the one that was tricked by the lullaby. Meanwhile, Gregory isn't tricked. Cassie is the one that falls for it. But now I'm thinking that it wasn't about Vanessa and Gregory at all, but it was about a family. Okay, I think I've got it. Here's the real story of Cassie and her father. Mr. Cassie's dad worked at the Pizzaplex since its inception. Gifted with technology and a deep lover of the franchise, Bonnie was his favorite after all, he thought his talents could lend to the creation of something wonderful. And as a fast technician, it did. Okay, bye. He was able to work alongside the animatronic characters that he loved, and his daughter Cassie could stay at the daycare while he did it. It was hard for her to make friends, spending most of her time at the daycare of the Pizzaplex, but she understood that this was for the best. Besides, she did have a lot of fun at the daycare, and having a dad who worked at the Pizzaplex came with its benefits. She was able to ride the Foxy log flume, although it was never open to the public. But when Bonnie, her dad's favorite animatronic, seemed to disappear one day, he got a lot more focused on his work. She asked him what happened to Bonnie, but he refused to tell her. Truthfully, he wasn't too sure himself. Bonnie goes to Monty Gator Golf one night out of nowhere, and suddenly he turns up in the back of Bonnie Bowling, destroyed, surrounded by a smashed bowling ball. None of it made sense. Nothing added up. So he started snooping. He traced the electrical signals going from the animatronics, trying to figure out what was causing them to act erratically. Eventually, he found a current of electricity pooling cooling underneath Roxy Raceway. The same current electricity that was causing all of these brownouts. Going even deeper, eventually he found it. The mimic, the creature underneath the Pizzaplex that's being locked away. He's confused and doesn't really understand what's going on, but between the mimic being there, the M.X.E.S machine, and the console to use it, he starts to piece things together. As a fast technician, Mr. Cassie's dad would be pretty smart, and so he works on the M.X.E.S unit, placing security nodes all over the basement and expanding its coverage. He begins placing security nodes throughout the facility, trying to cut off its access points. And to make sure no one messes with these security nodes, he creates sort of a digital watchdog that can tell when someone's trying to hack in. Once it finds that person, it simply summons a nearby animatronic. After all, most animatronics in the facility are programmed to be able to handle and safely extract any ne'er-do-wells. So what's the harm in having a distress signal? He styles this watchdog after his favorite animatronic, Bonnie. But before he can finally finish the entire system, he's called to the all-staff meeting. We cut to much later. The mimic eventually is able to disable all of the nearby security nodes, but it still can't get out. There are security nodes that are just too far away and it can't reach. It needs a decoy. It needs someone else to deactivate those on its behalf so it can leave. It once again digitally extends to the nearby room, and it finds the console. Not only that, it finds that someone was logged in to the console recently. Mr. Cassie's dad. Someone who would not only have credentials in the system, but a linked daughter in the system who stayed at the daycare. A daughter with contact information. Using the only voice it's been able to mimic, Gregory, it reaches out to that daughter. And luckily enough, she responds. I want to be very clear here. I don't think Mr. Cassie's dad was actually the one to build M.X.E.S. The machine is incredibly rusted and aged. It's honestly the oldest looking thing in that room. I think somebody else entirely built M.X.E.S, but it's someone we know. I think I know who made M.X.E.S, why there's Nightmare-owned plushes all over, and what the mimic is still doing here. Today's theory is going to be probably my most controversial one yet, but I feel really strongly about it, and I do think there's solid evidence for it. And before I go into it, two things to keep in mind. One, this is just a theory, so if you don't agree with it, that's perfectly fine. And two, if it is true, I don't think any retconning has occurred. I think we just haven't had all the answers until now. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. One of the biggest mysteries about Ruin we still have in front of us is who made this M.X.E.S machine? And exactly what does it do? We hear from Gregory that it was built to conceal the mimic, something that has been down in the FNAF 6 pizzeria for a really long time. The game pretty much begs us to ask, when was it put there, and why? Well, let's look at what we have. We'll start with the mimic. I'm not going to spend too much time on the mimic specifically and its origins because I don't quite think it's important for today's theory. I'm not arguing where the mimic came from in this theory. I'm just arguing what it's doing now and how it's being contained. But very briefly, I'll touch on what the book tells us about the mimic. In the books, we get two instances of the mimic, one in the story The Mimic and one in the epilogues. It could be the same one, but there are some differences, so maybe just some time has passed. It's not super clear yet. What we do know is that it was originally created with the intent to copy whatever it sees and recreate that action. Eventually, Fazbear got its hands on it and made an entire line of mimics, but scrapped it after they started copying humans in unexpected ways. In the epilogues, the main villain is a mimic endoskeleton. It begins because a construction worker programs it to take apart staff bots by ripping off the arms and head and putting them in a pile. Eventually, that goes awry when it runs out of staff bots and starts turning on the construction workers instead. Later on in the epilogues, it hunts down teens that sneak into the Pizzaplex to do the same thing. It's incredibly intelligent, shown to be able to lure teens into a room by pretending to be a kid on the radio. But the important thing to note here is that the mimic in the epilogues doesn't seem to have any agony or malice attached to it. In the story The Mimic, we definitely see a very violent creature that is acting upon its programming tainted by agony. But in the epilogues, although it's violent and calculating, we get its perspective in the most recent edition, and it's calmly observing its environment and just trying to do its programming. All it wants to do is take off arms and heads. That's what it was told to do. It does it to a doll as it walks past, but there's no seeking to kill, it's just following its programming. Now, whether or not you believe the books are one-to-one with the game timeline, I think we can all agree that the information we get about the Mimic in this book is important to the Mimic we have in the game. If they're the same character or not, the information carries over. Sort of like how in the Silver Eyes we get William Afton, Henry Emily, and even if they aren't the exact same character, the information we get about them is crucial to figuring out what happens in the games. So what do we know about the Mimic in-game? Looking at the model of it, we can definitely tell that it was made up of many different endoskeletons. The arms and legs are all mismatched, and the head is interesting as well. Definitely big teeth, but notably fake teeth, whereas Burntrap had real teeth. Interesting. Then we have these strange things stuck to its face, which get somewhat answered when we look at the room and the secret ending. The Mimic tends to put on costumes. In its room, we see 2 plush and felt old mascot costumes, a circus elephant and some big bird. There was also at some point presumably a lion, seeing as the Mimic puts on what looks to be the majority of a lion mascot suit. So we're pretty safe to say that these weird pieces stuck to it is just felt and plush from the costumes that it's working with. We know that it's able to mimic voices, as it directly mimics Gregory, but also seemingly begins to mimic Roxy during their fight. We also know that it wants out. It wants to leave. It's been locked in a room for a long time. Being locked in that room caused it to mimic. Mimic? It mimicked once. And in that room, the door is shut and cemented over. Sure, there's a cave behind it, but it's blocked by a wall until the forklift crashes through. But it wasn't in this room the whole time, was it? Gregory and Vanessa know about the Mimic. Gregory tells us it's been down here a long time, but the environment tells us a lot more about their encounter with it. We see this backpack very prominently in the last room of the DLC. On it is Gregory's name, and it's right next to this collapsed vent. If you go out of bounds, you can see that this collapsed vent originally connected to the room the Mimic is currently trapped in. This was the trap. Gregory and Vanessa did what the teens in the epilogues couldn't. Gregory went into this room as bait, lured the Mimic in, and escaped through the vent as Vanessa closed the door. Then the two of them cemented it over to seal it in. They trapped the Mimic in that half of the room. So logically, they must have also built the M.X.E.S machine to keep it hidden, right? Not quite. Oh, okay, bye. Oh my god. I'm not gonna even get the lint roller this time. I'm just gonna wipe. If you look around the half of the room that has M.X.E.S in it with the mask on, you can see several deactivated security nodes. I think that this is trying to show us that the Mimic was in this half of the room at some point, while M.X.E.S was active and actively trying to turn off nodes. So if the Mimic and M.X.E.S were in this room and active before Gregory and Vanessa got there, who put M.X.E.S there? Who was there before Gregory and Vanessa? I've stated previously that I think the father of our player character, Cassie, has something to do with this. Throughout the game, we get so many hints toward him. We know he worked at the Pizzaplex, he has a Faz wrench, he loved the franchise, his favorite character is Bonnie. And that Faz wrench he has is something that you need to even access this room. It was even installed on the forklift in there. So he would have access to the room, but he also has a reason to go there. We know from the duffel bag messages and security breach that workers at the Pizzaplex were beginning to catch on to Vanny's shenanigans. So a technician noticing something messing with the electricity and animatronics at the Pizzaplex and going to investigate it is completely possible. We even get a direct example of this with the construction crew noticing brownouts, so people knew something was going on. And if he went down there and found the Mimic causing all of these issues, creating M.X.E.S is in character for what we know about Cassie's dad. After all, his favorite was Bonnie, and the avatar M.X.E.S uses looks just like a digital Bonnie. But there's really 2 issues with this. First, he would have been down there fairly recently, and second, he's most likely dead. On the dead thing, Cassie only really exclusively uses past tense to describe her father. So that, plus nobody coming to her birthday party, seems to imply that he's been dead for some time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't build M.X.E.S. After all, the rabbit we see as the avatar of M.X.E.S could be his soul inside of it. Now, I do hear some of you, her dad can't be M.X.E.S, M.X.E.S kills her dad would never do that. But counterpoint, M.X.E.S doesn't intend to, or even realistically, kill anyone. From what we can see, the programming of M.X.E.S seems to be locate whoever is hacking the security protocol and alert nearby animatronics and staff bots to remove them from the premises. After all, if the Pizzaplex was fully operational, all the animatronics and staff bots are equipped with security measures to safely and efficiently remove ne'er-do-wells from the premises. It's just acting on that notion. There's no reason to believe that M.X.E.S would know that the animatronics are deadly or even want deadly force. The death part is most likely an accident. It's just calling for help. So then, if Cassie's dad being dead doesn't disqualify him from building M.X.E.S, why does recency? Look at the build of this machine. Everything in this room is older. The forklift, the canisters in the back, even the console. But the M.X.E.S machine is aged. It is rusty and bulkier than anything in that room. The paneling even is reminiscent of that 70s stained glass tile system that a lot of aesthetics used back then. This thing is much older than the rest of the technology in here, or at least has been here for a good time longer. So while Cassie's dad is very likely to have modified the M.X.E.S program, probably adding the security nodes and the M.X.E.S avatar of a rabbit, pretty much all the rabbit things seems to be Cassie's dad, the chance that he fully built this thing from the ground up and programmed its original purpose is slim. It needs to be here earlier than that. After all, Gregory says the Mimic has been down there a really long time. M.X.E.S needs to be down there equally as long. So if that's the case, who was in this room before him?
Like that, and then what also kind of influences theory. If you look behind you, like directly behind you, right over there, go up to those cans there. That's propane. That's an accelerant or fire.
True. I mean, to be fair, this is the FNAF 6 location.
I'm thinking this is a room.
So like
Henry
that would add up. Oh.
Yeah.
Henry. The whole point of FNAF 6 is that the pizzeria is a trap built by Henry. If there is a really old piece of technology in this pizzeria, it would make sense that Henry was the one who made it. But if that's here, then what's its original purpose? And did that purpose include the Mimic? To answer that, we need to look at what happens in FNAF 6 and compare it to Steel Wool's favorite version of storytelling in Security Breach, the environment. Everyone remembers Henry's FNAF 6 speech. It's one of the most iconic moments in the entire FNAF franchise, where we see Henry lament about what happened and tell us he's burning everything and everyone to the ground and dies. But is that actually what happens? Henry says it's time for all of us to rest, but as far as burning goes, we only see 3. William Afton, Scrap Baby, and Molten Freddy. They are burnt alive and presumably mostly destroyed, but we never see Lefty burn. The animatronic built to capture the marionette, the thing that the soul of Henry's daughter Charlotte is inside of. He says,
"It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication."
It's implied that the rest he's giving her is burning her to the ground. And I admit, if anyone has logic for this, this is probably the biggest flaw about what I'm about to say. He does say it's time for all of us to rest. So if anyone can figure out that issue, let me know, because that feels like a big problem with this theory. But for now, let's move past it. Is he actually burning her? Does he burn the marionette and himself? Well, let's look back to Security Breach. At the end of Ruin, we get a personal look at the FNAF 6 labyrinth, the corridors and rooms that Henry used to burn everything to the ground. But in Security Breach proper and in Ruin, there's only ever 3 burning rooms shown. In the Burn Trap boss fight of Security Breach, and when we finally get to explore it ourselves in Ruin, we only ever see 3. And if there's a room dedicated to burning all the other burn rooms, you think it would be connected to every room, but there's only 3 connections. What's more, the room we suspect Henry to be in doesn't have any burners either. So did Henry burn himself and the marionette to death or not? I think this game is telling us that he didn't. That instead, he wanted to save her like Henry in the books tried to save Charlie, by making a robotic version of her. And his first attempt in doing that is using the Mimic. I'm still not 100% sure on where the Mimic originates. Whether Henry built it or maybe Tales Games is right and Edwin built it, I don't know. Hell, FNAF was really convincing on his recent theory. Go watch the full video, it's really good. But on the bright side, I'm not arguing right now on who built it. What I'm arguing is that through some method or means, this endoskeleton ends up in the FNAF 6 basement, the one Henry worked in during FNAF 6. And knowing that it can mimic voices and actions, after the FNAF 6 fire, he remains in the bunker and begins attempting to make the mimic a perfect replica of Charlotte. He's not trying to replace her like he does in the novels. He wants to literally save her. FNAF 6 teaches us that the scooper is primarily used to inject remnant. That's what the blueprints specifically say, and that's how Michael survives as literally a walking hunk of flesh. We know this nearly for sure. So, isn't it strange that another scooper is nearby this location? I think Henry was literally trying to recreate Charlotte. Let me lay out his plan here. After the FNAF 6 fire, he has the marionette trapped within Lefty. He knows his daughter's soul is in that marionette, and he knows William Afton came up with a way to move a soul from one robot to another with his scooper. If he can just make a robot good enough for Charlie and inject her soul into it, he could literally bring her back to life. This is what William was all about, and Henry is taking a page out of his book. He will put her back together again. So he began experimenting on the mimic and on the marionette, seeing if there was any way to combine the two. But he needed more time, and to ensure that nobody bothered him, he needed to shroud his experiments from the outside world. So he decides to conceal everything he's doing with a marionette experiment enshroudment system, M.X.E.S. This machine was built to conceal, not to harm, and not to hinder. He just doesn't want to be stopped. He knows he's getting older, and if anybody figures out what's going on, he will not have enough time to figure that out. But for whatever reason, he fails. Maybe the mimic kills him. Maybe the marionette escapes, and that's why there's hints of Charlie all over the Pizzaplex. I'm not sure. But if he was at least about to do the final experiment, there is a chance that the scooper ending finished what Henry started. But one of the questions that's been bothering a lot of us, what do the endings mean? Do they tell us anything we don't know about Ruin or possibly Security Breach itself? Or maybe, do they tell us about the next game Steel Wolf's going to make? That's what we're here to answer today. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. For anyone not in the know, there are 3 possible endings for Security Breach Ruin. There's a 4th one in the files that was coded, but there's no information, so it was most likely scrapped. The 3 endings we do have stem off of the same final chase sequence. So what is that sequence? Well, Cassie gets down to the old elevator under Roxy Raceway and makes it down to the FNAF 6 location, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. But the usual tunnel was caved in, revealing instead the giant statue down there has been disturbed by something tunneling out. Going through that tunnel, we approach the FNAF 6 pizzeria instead from the back, passing through this giant cave, some storerooms, Candy Cadet, even the rooms that Burntrap was in during the Security Breach boss fight. Deeper still, and we reach a room much lower than the rest of the pizza place, but still seemingly visually a part of it. In here, we find a forklift, the machine controlling M.X.E.S, and the console used to control the machine. We shut off the M.X.E.S console, trapping the rabbit that was chasing us inside of it, and opening the door forward, only to reveal that it's been poured over by concrete. We use the forklift to bust through, and we reveal it, the endoskeleton that tricked us down here in the first place, the Mimic. It's been copying Gregory's voice through a walkie-talkie to lure us into freeing it. Once we do, it tries to kill us. Talk about ungrateful. But for some unexplained reason, a very strange and unexplained reason, Roxy is apparently okay and comes in to save the day, buying us some time. Once we get away a little bit, the real Gregory, or so he says, comes over on the walkie-talkie to tell us that we were never supposed to be down here in the first place. He then says his friend has the building maps and can lead us out of here, we just have to listen to their instructions. This is where the deviations for the different endings begin to occur. So let's start off by explaining the one the files label as the neutral ending. If you run away from the Mimic, follow Gregory's instructions to a T, you eventually end up using your Faz wrench to open this elevator door. The Mimic gets caught in the door, losing its arm, but ultimately we get away. In the elevator ride, Gregory attempts to give us some more answers. Not only were we not supposed to go to the Pizzaplex, but he's not even at the Pizzaplex himself. He doesn't know what the Mimic is. Maybe he should read the books. But he does know that it's been trapped here for a really long time. The M.X.E.S machine we just shut off was a device built to conceal the mimic. Then a bit of feedback goes through. He then explains that this isn't our fault and he knows that we did it for him, but he can't risk them being followed. And our elevator drops, somehow not killing Cassie, as Roxy calls out our name confused after the credits. This ending seems straightforward on the surface, but there's actually a bit of a debate going on, one that I'm here to settle. Some people think that this is exactly as it seems. Gregory, although he doesn't want to, ultimately stops the elevator to make sure the mimic doesn't get out, killing Cassie in the process. The other camp think that at some point the mimic retakes over communication, and Gregory never actually is the one that cuts the elevator, and I'm here with evidence to show which side is right. Straight away, at some point I do think Gregory is talking to us in this ending. Notably, for most of this sequence, I agree with the files. In the game, anytime the mimic is talking to us pretending to be Gregory, the file name reads Grimmick. Yes, the Grimmick shake is canon in FNAF now, but there are other lines labeled in the game as Gregory. Notably, every line we get from Gregory after listening to the walkie-talkie after encountering the mimic. Now I know this might seem like case closed for the Gregory is guilty side of the argument. Reminder that they learned this firsthand in the very previous game Security Breach, where we found out the sprite in Princess Quest was named Cassie. They immediately changed it in the next update, but not only did they then learn that file names can spoil things for the future because of the fanbase file scraping, but they knew to change it so that we wouldn't spoil things for ourselves in the future. Which means some or all of the lines labeled Gregory could still be the mimic, they just don't want to give it away yet. So if that's the case, is it all the mimic, or do we go back at some point? Well, I'm not even close to the first person to point this out, but I think the feedback on the elevator is no accident. Right as that feedback goes through, the tone in Gregory's voice and dialogue shifts. He goes from giving us answers to apologizing and then sending us down. I and many others think that that feedback is when the mimic regains control of communication. The text box even resets at that moment, but if you're not convinced by just the dialogue, this might do it. Method. How could Gregory, someone who said he's not even at the Pizzaplex, drop the elevator on us? An old elevator that doesn't look like it's even connected to anything else. He would need to have some sort of ultra system controlling every single aspect of the Pizzaplex at like his bedroom or something. It's possible, but it's unlikely. But you know what is a very likely method? This elevator is powered by a battery pack right underneath the conduit that we charged. And you know who just got foiled and let Cassie get away and is sitting right next to that battery pack? The mimic. All it would have to do is just unclip one of the two clips and the elevator would come crashing back down. So not only is it far more likely character-wise for the mimic to trick and try to kill Cassie again, but it's easier for the mimic to do it than it would be for Gregory to do it. I think it's solidly in the camp that the mimic is the one that drops the elevator. The final bit about this ending that I do want to mention is Roxy's little bonus dialogue at the end of the credits, when she says, "Cassie?" This implies that Cassie's alive, and if she survived that massive elevator fall, I don't want to say it, but we should consider the possibility that Cassie isn't human. I'm just saying, that was a big fall. If she survived that, she is sturdy. But that in total, according to the files, is the neutral ending of Security Breach Ruin. Now on to, honestly, what might be the most confusing out of the three, the Scooper ending. This is by far the hardest ending to get, as it's the only one that requires any prerequisites, not to mention that the prerequisites are hard to find. Throughout the game you have these camera stations, but 4 specific camera stations, one being the very first one you encounter, one in the Monty Catwalks, one in the Roxy Salon, and one in Bonnie Bowling, you can zoom out further than you normally can, and on the very edge of the map is a secret camera. On each of these, when you open a secret camera, it shows a doorway and a door opening in that doorway. Oh, bye-bye. If you've done all this correctly and get back to the ending, you'll find that things are slightly different now. The mimic has changed. It's put on this amalgamation costume made out of a lion, an elephant, and a bird. The next scene plays out as normal, but at the end of the chase sequence, the elevator access is blocked off, and instead you go down the 4 doors that you opened. Suddenly, you're in a bit of a higher tech room. You go behind a door that closes and locks, and then you're just looking through glass with a button on a podium. You press the button, the room fills up with some kind of fog, the mimic shows up, and then The scooper kills it, apparently. Some kind of fight happens in the fog, you can't even see it, trust me, I've gone out of bounds, but at the end of it, the Mimic is on the ground and the scooper hides away. Now it is worth noting that this is just the Mimic's costume. In the model that chases you, you can see bits of the Mimic sticking out through the mouth, the stomach, and things like that. But I went out of bounds and I looked at this model. That endoskeleton is gone, which does track with what the scooper is intended to do. But in this ending, the Mimic escapes somewhere. I still hold strong that I'm not 100% sure what this ending is supposed to mean. But I do have a pretty solid idea, and it's all based on location. I've stated before in several different theories where I think the locations of several important places in the franchise are. Namely, I think the sister location Bunker and Fredbear's Family Diner are fairly close together, mainly because of the Funtime Freddy Fuse map. This one sister location minigame has so much lore potential throughout the entire franchise. One of the most important things to note about it is the connections the map makes. Based off of the layouts of these two buildings, we can assume that this is the FNAF 4 house and that this is Fredbear's Family Diner. So if there's connected power between the sister location Bunker, the FNAF 4 house, and Fredbear's Family Diner, we can assume they're all relatively nearby one another. Now, most people do believe the sister location Bunker is directly, if not very close to underneath the FNAF 4 house. That makes a lot of sense. But Fredbear's Family Diner being nearby is very important. Why? Well, it's widely believed, and I believe it too, that the FNAF 6 fake pizzeria was built on top of or within Fredbear's Family Diner. It would explain the remote location, how Henry had access to it, and the rather bare bones internal layout. Do you see where I'm headed with this? I think that this lot started as Fredbear's Family Diner, then was converted to the fake pizzeria for FNAF 6, and then was later bulldozed over and turned into the Mega Pizzaplex. So, what does all this have to do with the ending? Well, I don't think the allusion to sister location in this ending is an accident. I mean, the game's ending sequence is literally listening to somebody give you instructions on whether to go left or right. You can either listen to those instructions and get to an ending that either involves a scooper or an elevator, or you can disobey those instructions and get a questionably canon secret ending. Oh, wait, sorry. I just described word for word the ending to sister location. We were talking about Ruin. Wait a minute, it's the same description. So if this is so connected already, and the sister location Bunker and Fredbear's Family Diner were connected by power, who's to say that this room isn't the actual original scooping room? Alright, I hear you. The design of the scooper is completely different, and the room has been changed too. But I do have two explanations for that. First, if this tunnel had been known to Vanny or Glitchtrap, they could have been working on the scooper and making their own modifications to it, as this does look a lot more effective than the original model. But it could be as simple as the second option. Steelwool has already shown that they're willing to do character redesigns if it's cool or fits the narrative. Case in point, Roxy. Her design is completely different from when we see her, and it's not a matter of being more damaged, that is a different endoskeleton. But it's fine because it serves a purpose in this game. The scooper could be the same way, where they've redesigned the scooper, but it's still meant to be the same one. That could be this. Regardless, the button shape and layout, the scooping room layout, the window layout, and the proximity of these buildings really has me believing that this room is the original sister location scooping room. And if so, what does that tell us? No, really, what does that tell us? That wasn't rhetorical. I have no idea what's going on here. Like, I have all this context and I think I know the meaning behind it, but as far as what it's trying to say for the story, I have no clue. Maybe I'll find out one day. Go watch some Let's Plays or something in the meantime. Finally, that middle ending. The secret ending that's easy to get. What the files label as the Brazil ending. All you have to do to get this ending is disobey Gregory in a specific moment. The third time he says go right, instead you go left, and you find a Fredbear cutout holding 2 ice cream cones. If you put your mask on in this moment, you're transported to a recreation of the good Vanny ending, the Princess Quest ending, with Gregory saying that he found a place to hide, Cassie breathing panickedly, and the game fades to black. This is admittedly very confusing, but I think we know what this means. And it even tells us a bit about the next game after Help Wanted 2. So folks, bake with me for a moment. I think that this ending is fake. Okay, so like it actually happens in the game, but within the game's continuity, it's fake. Okay, let me put it this way. What Cassie is seeing here isn't real in any way. This is her losing to the Vanny mask, and to the Mimic by extension. Our protagonist is no longer Cassie. This is Cassidy, a newer, more sinister character to use that name. Note, I'm not saying she literally turns into Cassidy here. I'm just saying she changes her name like Vanny to Vanessa, Cassie to Cassidy. Okay, just bear with me. Bear with me. There is a bear with me. Our first hint of the fakeness is the dialogue that we hear. This Gregory voice line is the exact same one we hear the Mimic use in the Roxy salon.
That was people, I remember in the trailer.
I'm okay. I found a spot to hide.
So we know that isn't Gregory. Our second hint is that this isn't the good Vanny ending. Like, we have a Freddy character, a Gregory, and a Vanessa on a hill eating ice cream, sure, but it's not the same. In the original, they're all sitting side by side. Gregory is eating a popsicle, there's a Freddy head, and Vanessa's eating an ice cream cone. And Gregory and Helpie, not Freddy's head, are facing us holding ice cream cones. Gregory and Helpie, the exact same two fake people who led us down here in the first place. Once again, they're leading us astray. But for what? Why is this happening? The game tells us that too, but first, a little context. For those who haven't read the books, in Tales number 5, the story GGY tells us a lot about our boy Gregory. Assuming this book, or the majority of it, is to be in the game's timeline, which I do, before the events of Security Breach, Gregory was a mind-controlled slave to the Mimic, just like Vanessa was. His name, GGY, as Vanessa's was Vanny. If we take that idea from the books and pair it with the fact that in the games, we don't see Gregory return to a home after Security Breach, and we know there is a child-sized hidden alcove in the daycare, just like Vanny's hidden alcove in the Phaser Blast, I think it's safe to assume that this secret hideout is where GGY was living. Finally, and I'm not the only person to make these connections, FNAF has a whole video on Gregory and how he's been trapped, I think it's incredibly likely that the Balloon World machine is what trapped Gregory's mind within GGY, just like the Princess Quest machine trapped Vanessa within Vanny. Or rather, those machines were the key to freeing them. Okay, so why does that matter? Well, look at the two other things that were added to this ending: balloons and the daycare theme. Cassie, just like Gregory, has been taken by the Mimic. Cassie might very well be our next antagonist, if this ending is the canon one. Still don't believe me? Then take it from Steel Wool themselves. The ending is labeled in the files as the Brazil ending. At first this seems quite random, but a bunch of folks on Twitter found a movie from 1985 titled Brazil. Let me read you the ending paragraph on Wikipedia. Sam is restrained in a chair in a large empty cylindrical room to be tortured by his old friend Jack Lint. As Jack is about to start the torture, Tuttle and other members of the resistance break into the ministry, shooting Jack, rescuing Sam, and blowing up the ministry building. Sam and Tuttle flee together. A whole escape sequence plays. At the end, Jack is surprised to find himself in a truck driven by Jill. The two leave the city together. However, this happy ending is a delusion. It is revealed that Sam is still strapped to the torture chair. Does it all click now? This ending is the mental prison that Cassie gets put in to turn into the next Vanny. And I think it tells us the next game Steel Wool is going to make after Help Wanted 2. For those who don't know, there are a lot of prototype maps that were left in the files for Ruin, things that never made the cut. One of them is mostly nonsense, except for the fact that there's a big sign on it that says, quote, something cool that maybe foreshadows Carnival. Carnival? To me, Carnival sounds like a project name for an upcoming game that they have not yet publicly announced. But that word Carnival, doesn't it invoke Balloon World? Or even the Balloon Circus animatronics that keep popping up again and again in merchandise? Not only that, but look at two of the costumes the Mimic uses in this basement. A lion and an elephant, two of the most prolific circus animals. I believe in the works at Steel Wool right now is a game where we play as Cassie trapped in this cage and try to break out. We see this hill shot with balloons and music in the background, and we pan down to see Fredbear's Singin' Show, the very carnival that Security Breach introduced into the canon, and that is why a Fredbear cutout gets us this ending. So does that mean the Brazil ending is canon? Dude, I don't know. Where the hell is Vanny? In that game, it seemed like she was just underutilized, but in Ruin, I expected to see her at least a little bit. But then I thought I understood why she wasn't here. Assuming the Princess Quest ending is canon, Vanessa, Gregory, and Freddy's head should have been out of the building way before it ever collapsed. But if that's true, then why is there Vanny graffiti all over the ruins of the Pizzaplex? Pizzaplex. That's what we're here today to solve. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. Let's start with where we last saw Vanessa, security breach. Her fate is heavily dependent on which ending actually brings us to Ruin. But what are those fates? Well, there's three main themes. The first that happens in the bad alleyway ending is that she's alive and well. We see Vanny survive and presumably keep working under Glitch Trap. The second theme is Vanny being confirmed dead. It's the outcome we see in the fire escape ending and the disassemble Vanny ending. Not a great track record so far, but there is one more theme we see in the Save Vanny ending, where Vanessa seemingly is freed of Vanny's influence because of the Princess Quest machine, and her, Gregory, and Freddy's head leave the Pizzaplex for good. Now, I hear you. I said that all the endings fit in those three themes, but I lied. I lied for dramatic effect. I'll do it again. Anyway, the other two endings just don't give us any information about Vanny whatsoever. The van ending and the burn trap ending don't show her even a little bit, so I guess she's probably fine. That's where she is at the end of Security Breach, but what about Ruin? That's actually where we run into our major problem. A problem like not checking out my second channel, Ride Toost, where highly edited gameplay videos get posted, like my part 1 of Ruin playthrough, my part 1 of My Friendly Neighborhood playthrough. You should go click link right there. Thank you very much for supporting it. Thank you. Anyway, like I said in the opener, at first this tracks with what we know about Ruin. Looking at the comic pages, Gregory seems to have invented all of these endings. The alley, the van, my favorite, the fire escape, disassemble Vanny, burn trap, all except for one, save Vanny. That's the only ending not drawn by Gregory. But that's not all. We get to see two of the Princess Quest arcade machines, both of them off, one of them toppled on its side with an AR golden sword stuck into it. Even more than that, when we encounter Freddy in Phaser Blast, assuming he is the same one, he's on a pile of staff bots in the same location with the exact same damage on his chest. Also missing his head. Like, everything here points to the Save Vanny Princess Quest ending being canon, which lines up with what we see in Ruin. Vanessa, Gregory, and Freddy's head are nowhere to be found in this Pizzaplex. They're no longer here. They left before everything collapsed. There shouldn't be any traces of Vanessa or Gregory left in that Pizzaplex. At least no traces that are on the ruined part of it, but there are. The first functional staff bot we see, Mask Bot, that gives us the Vanny mask, has been carved and bent into having rabbit ears. Some of the mini music men have been modified to look like little rabbits. Now, sure, this could just be the influence of Afton, he is the rabbit guy after all, but what about Vanny specifically? Something only she would do. In a lot of spots of this ruined collapsed Pizzaplex, there's graffiti, but specifically graffiti depicting Vanny. Graffiti that could have only been put there after the Pizzaplex collapsed. So is Vanny out of the picture or isn't she? Did the Princess Quest machine even get beaten? Is that even the canon ending? Well, it is, but I don't think it's the only one. Let's look at what these comic pages mean to us. Does their existence necessitate that whatever they're depicting never happened? I'm not so sure. The game does tell us that Gregory created all of these, but look at the Burn Trap comic page. We have a very clear and specific drawing of Burn Trap and the Tangle, the new canon name for the Blob. It was in the file, so we officially know what the canon name is. And thank God, because it's way better than the Blob. Specifically from that ending. If we are to assume that this ending didn't happen, then this scene wouldn't have happened either. But the Tangle is real. We see it ourselves with our own eyes at the beginning of Ruin. So it's not like he created the idea of the Tangle. He must have seen it. The problem is, in Security Breach, if you've seen the Tangle, that means you've done the Burn Trap ending. To get there, you go down a one-way elevator shaft, and then a one-way hole in the ground, then you see the Tangle. If Gregory saw the Tangle, the only way to keep going was further down, implying he would have then met Burn Trap and done that boss fight. And if he did the boss fight, that would imply that the Tangle then took Burn Trap away, and we see Freddy and Gregory escape to a hill somewhere. So is that what happens here? Well, I don't think that makes much sense either, because of what Gregory knows and because of Freddy. Freddy is the most apparent issue here. Even though he now has that prototype stamp on his foot, he is in the exact same position with the exact same damage to his shell. I don't see any reason for this to not be our Freddy. So if we see Freddy here, then he couldn't have been here. Second, in the Burn Trap ending, Gregory beats Burn Trap, then him and Freddy run out of the Pizzaplex immediately and leave there for good. That's fine, we don't see Gregory in Ruin. Him not being at the Pizzaplex makes sense. But in Ruin, he knows about the Mimic and he knows about M.X.E.S, and all this information that he wouldn't be privy to unless he was in that basement for a while. So he would have had to be down there for longer or have learned it from somebody else. Speaking of someone else, where's Vanessa this whole time? We technically don't have any information whatsoever on Vanessa or Vanny and her whereabouts in the Ruin DLC. There's no evidence of her existing. So does that mean Steelwool and Scott have just moved on from her entirely? I don't think so. Because while we don't have evidence of her being here, we have a lot of evidence of her influence over the area. The Vanny-styled graffiti, the Vanny mask, the rabbit animatronics. I mentioned previously that while yes, rabbits are primarily a William Afton thing, Vanny herself was very obsessed with rabbits as his follower. But furthermore than that, what could Afton do in the physical world realistically? At least after the collapse of the Pizzaplex. The only piece of this game that I can figure could be influenced at all by Glitchtrap or William Afton in any way would be the Mimic or Helpie, presumably Glitchtrap. And the Mimic is trapped in the basement, and Helpie is in the AR world. Nobody here could do graffiti or physically modify animatronics, especially since the main Glamrock seem to not be affected by the Glitchtrap virus anymore. They would need physical help. It's why they called Cassie down there in the first place. So if there is rabbit-themed mischief all over the Pizzaplex before Cassie gets there but after the collapse, what gives? How is Vanny still here if Vanessa left? Well, Tales from the Pizzaplex book coming out in October might just have our answer. For those who are unaware, in the first week or so of October, we're scheduled to get the final book in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, or at least the final book currently announced, Tales from the Pizzaplex number 8, B7-2. And like most of the books that's come out for the series, folks got their hands on it early and started leaking things pretty much immediately. It has a lot of information about the games, especially FNAF 4, which we will get into at some point, trust me. But one of those big bits of information comes from the sequel of B7. Now, I haven't covered B7 on this channel because I personally really don't like the story. The author has come out and admitted there was no malice or intent or anything like that. Accidentally or not, B7 has some really transphobic themes in it, and I do not want to cover it on the channel. Luckily, I don't even really have to talk about the plot or characters of B7 for what we're here for today. As with the previous book series in the franchise, the most important information here is the rules of the universe we're working in. Like in the Silver Eyes, I don't think the Silver Eyes happened one for one with the games. That's pretty much impossible at this point. Some things might have carried over, but rules like how Remnant works in the universe, very important, something we learned from the books. And likewise, something really important happens in B7 too. The first time I actually saw this mentioned was by GGY or Zarek5 on Twitter, where they went into the repercussions of B7 2. In that story, once our main character Billy finally snaps, he develops this different, strange, not himself personality. But in this sequel, we learn that he's able to separate from that personality as long as it has a vessel of its own, leaving him wholly separated from that darker version of himself. Zarek then extended that logic to Vanessa and Gregory, and I think he's right. But what would that mean for the story? Well, let's look back to Ruin. We get to see the two arcade machines that most likely held onto the lock on the minds of Gregory and Vanessa, Balloon World and Princess Quest. Quick catch up for you non-book readers. It's very likely that before the events of Security Breach, Gregory was actually working with Vanny as Patient 46 under the moniker GGY. For evidence, go to this video. And just as Vanessa's mind was locked inside the Princess Quest arcade machine, it's very likely that Gregory's mind was locked inside the Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare. Check this video for evidence. Anyway, back to it. We know that after you beat the third Princess Quest machine, the rabbit creature screams out and Vanessa is seemingly freed of Vanny, leaving the mask on the ground. I knew with all these ideas going on there was some kind of connection here, but I wanted some kind of other tangible evidence. And that's when I was talking to my thumbnail artist BarBADroid, and he mentioned that if you look at the arcade machines Princess Quest and Balloon World, there's this particle effect of something floating out of it, as if something recently left the machine. These, as far as I'm aware, are the only arcade machines that do this. And then it all fell into place. So bake with me for a moment as I lay out exactly what possibly happened in the lead up to Ruin. Just before Security Breach, either the conscious mind of Gregory or somebody else entirely beat the Balloon World arcade machine. This took GGY out of Gregory and returned it to the Afton-controlled arcade machine, leaving Gregory conscious but groggy and confused. It must have felt like he woke up from a very long sleep just before the game starts. His memory memory is slowly returning. This is why Gregory struggles with his own name right at the beginning of the game. Then by the end of it, he beats Princess Quest, doing that same service to Vanessa, freeing her. Now recently freed, the three of them leave the Pizzaplex off to better things and try to forget all of this that ever happened. All is not well at the Pizzaplex. From their perspective, those times are behind them. All the personas created under the Mimic-1 or Glitch Trap virus have been destroyed. They're long gone and the Mimic is trapped deep under the Pizzaplex. It's all good, but they didn't kill the infection. They just removed it from themselves. GGY and Vanny are still at the Pizzaplex. Their personality, their mannerisms, they just need new hosts. GGY being free a bit longer than Vanny was gave it a head start. And if it was personally created to serve the Mimic and even called itself his favorite apprentice, of course it would go to it. And if GGY went to the Mimic, there's a high probability that this personality infected it, just as it did Gregory. After all, the Mimic is trying its hardest to recreate Gregory to trick Cassie. It would make a lot of sense if it got a head start by absorbing this GGY personality. But then that still leaves Vanny still stuck inside the Princess Quest arcade machine. She also needs a vessel. So it's no mistake that GGY, as the Mimic, calls Cassie to the building and gives her the Vanny mask. Sure, the Mimic needs Cassie to deactivate the security nodes to free it, but throughout the game, it's testing Cassie and beginning to turn her into the perfect vessel for Vanny, and the Brazil ending is its final resolution. This feels really solid with the context that the books are giving us, and it tracks thematically with what we've had in the past. Traumatic event breaks into a remnant version and agony version of that person. Now its traumatic event breaks into the darker and normal side of their personalities. It thematically tracks with what we've had in the past. But what do you think? Is this even close? Where do you think Vanny is in this Ruin DLC?